Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for joining. Happy Friday. I'm going to keep admitting people in the background, and I'm going to turn it over to Leanne.
Hello. So today for Forum, we've got Casey Rand. Casey Rand is the Chief Creative Officer of the Potential Energy Coalition, a nonprofit creative collective trying to shift the narrative on climate change and motivate urgent action. And prior to joining Potential Energy, Casey was an executive creative director at Droga 5, where she worked on Harley Davidson, YMCA, Under Armour, and more. And she's been named one of Adweek's most culturally influential leaders and one of 35 women trailblazers and an industry icon. And in 2015, she won the first ever Glass Lion at the Cannes Lion International Festival of Creativity. And when she's not trying to stop the world from spontaneously combusting, she writes short humor for The New Yorker, McSweeney's, and Reductress. She graduated from the Adcenter in 2008, back when it was the Adcenter, and lives in Brooklyn, New York with her husband, a 2005 Adcenter grad, and their fake ficus, Faye.
Thanks, Leanne. Hi, everybody. I'm super excited to be here. I wish I was there with you in person because I could really go for some Pearlie's breakfast, but I will settle for this virtual forum. And I'm just really honored to be spending time with you today. So I'm going to share my screen. I have a little presentation. I think if you have questions along the way, just drop them in the chat, and maybe Leanne at the end, we can go through a whole bunch. But yeah, let me just see if I can get this to work. Y'all see this? Great. Okay, so the title of my talk is Uh-oh, Am I Bad? And it was a working title for a while, but then I kind of just stuck with it. The actual purpose of my talk is to talk to you about your purpose in the ad world. And the reason I'm talking about this is because, like Leanne said, in 2019, I left my job as an ECD at Droga to kind of take on the role of CCO at a climate nonprofit. And after I announced I was leaving, this weird thing happened where tons of creatives reached out to me to say, like, some of them wanted to just like offer creative support and resources and all that kind of stuff. But a lot of them reached out to me with this kind of guilty email that always goes a little bit something like this. You know, hope you're doing good. Been thinking a lot about doing more meaningful work lately. Advertising's fun, but at the same time, it could be kind of shallow. I want to chat about your experience in Droga. I imagine it was hard, but you've crossed the bridge. So I was really shocked by the amount of people I got emails like this from. And since I've started this endeavor, I've probably spoken to 20 or 30 creatives one-on-one about their careers and what they want to do. So I kind of want to talk to you today about how to use your powers for good that you're learning at the Adcenter. But first I want to go back in time a little bit and tell you about how I got here, because I have always loved learning about people's paths. So I thought you might want to know about mine. So it all started on a winter's night in 1983. I'm just kidding. I'm not going to go this far back. That would be psychotic. I'll start in 2008. That's me at my graduation from the Adcenter with a bunch of other people that you probably recognize right now. Like right next to me, that's Tim Gordon. He's the CCO of Droga 5. We were roommates the first year out of school. But I was super lucky in that I got a job right out of ad school before the recruiter session in April at BBDO in New York. And I was totally ecstatic. It'd be my dream since I was a 10-year-old girl in Montreal to live in New York City. And I just couldn't believe it was going to be my life. And then this happened in 2008. So I promptly moved to New York and was informed by BBDO that there was no job anymore. And I didn't have an apartment and I didn't have a paycheck to look for an apartment. So I kind of just started pounding the pavement and trying to get any job, barista, waitress, bus driver, literally anything. And I was lucky in that, 2 weeks later, BBDO called me back and said, oh, we made it work. We found the $35,000 that we were going to pay you, and you can, there's a place for you here. So I was obviously ecstatic and went to work at my first job at BBDO. And the first assignment, first spot I ever shot was an AT&T commercial starring Mariah Carey. And I wanted to show you the first spot I ever made. I had to dig this up on the internet. I did like not know where it was. And I found it on some like weird Mariah Carey fan site. So there's like a watermark halfway through, but I'm gonna play it for you.
I emailed you the list. Her plane just landed. Go!
I need a rush order of orchids. Thanks. Excuse me, I'm looking for a dog bed?
What kind of dog?
Oh. This kind?
Nice job.
Oh.
Stay a step ahead on the nation's fastest 3G network.
Dude, just made out with Mariah Carey.
AT&T. Now get 50% off these Samsung touchscreen phones after mail-in rebate, only from AT&T.
So that was it. The first commercial I ever made in my entire career.
I emailed.
This commercial, when I got to the shoot, I was like in total shock. I mean, you all are probably a million miles ahead of my class in terms of like understanding the industry and knowing what you're about to jump into. But I couldn't believe that this was my life, to be honest. Like I got to the Fontainebleau in Miami where we were shooting. It was like the most luxurious hotel I'd ever been to. We shot with Bennett Miller, who's an Oscar-winning director. He directed Moneyball and Capote. And I wrote Mariah Carey into a script and she showed up on the set and we shot it. And I just thought it was the coolest job in the entire world. And I couldn't believe that I got to do this for the rest of my life. And I think that's kind of one of the magical allures of advertising, right? So I spent the next kind of 15 years of my life trying to come up with the best ideas so I could work with the best directors, so I could win the best awards. And this is actually a photo of my husband and I at an award show. Leanne said this, but he's also a VCU grad. This is us in Romania. But you know, even as I rose through the ranks in my job and won a bunch of awards, there was always this nagging voice in the back of my head going, am I bad? Is this an ethical career choice? Am I fueling the rampant consumerism that keeps us all wanting more all the time and is, you know, responsible for raping and pillaging the planet? So, you know, you might not feel that way ever in your career. So please don't take that as a general indictment of the ad industry. I'm a socialist from Canada, so it's kind of my default personality, but it was like this always there in the back of my head, even when I was doing work that I loved with people that I loved. And then I got to Droga 5, and there was this kind of pronounced emphasis on doing work for good. So, you know, I'd worked on pro bono projects before at other jobs, but it was always kind of like pulling teeth. You couldn't really get the agency to commit. There was no money involved. At Droga, it was kind of in the agency's DNA because the two things they had done to kind of put themselves on the map were actually cause-based campaigns. And kind of every assignment at Droga was a chance to shift culture or make a statement. And I think that might be a little more common now, but when I got there in 2012, it was kind of unique. And at Droga, I really found my creative voice working on cause-based issues. I did another campaign with Sarah Silverman for equal pay. I worked on gender equality, community building, and I helped elect at least one president by working on Hillary's campaign, which didn't work out very well, but it was fun nonetheless. But despite my best efforts, that nagging voice was kind of like always still there, even when I was working on my pro bono stuff on the side at Droga. And in 2019, I was given a climate change brief at Droga. This brand consultant named John Marshall, who's the founder of Potential Energy, kind of pulled a bunch of agencies together to talk about how we could shift the narrative on climate change to get citizens to demand action, because basically the communications of the last 40 years of polar bears and melting ice caps just like isn't, you know, they weren't working. So Droga 5 was one of the agencies that he called, and I ended up working on this assignment. And, you know, obviously I knew climate change was bad. I knew it was a problem. I was worried about it, but I don't think I totally understood what was going on until I was in this briefing. And they had this guy who we partner with now quite a bit, Dan Schrag. He's like a Harvard climate scientist, and he was Obama's climate guru. And he kind of gave us this really sobering brief, and he taught us about the Keeling curve, which is basically just the chart that measures the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere over time. And if you look at this chart, you can see that basically, you know, from the dawn of history right up until that last little speck is the year 0. So it's pretty pronounced how CO2 in the atmosphere was fairly level for a really long time until the Industrial Revolution. And if you look at that chart now, you can see that the CO2 is literally off the chart. We've never been in territory like this, and humans have never safely lived on Earth with this much CO2 in the atmosphere. So that was, you know, fairly sobering. And then he also taught us about how kind of every molecule of pollution we put in the air stays in the atmosphere, trapping heat for tens of thousands of years. So actually, like, the heat and dryness causing the world to be so hot right now is actually the product of like our moms taking us to school when we were little, or, you know, people flying in planes 30 years ago. And the molecules of CO2 we put in the air now are going to be responsible for an even hotter Earth when our kids are older. And this idea of irreversibility, that like the pollution we put in the air today is actually going to cause the problems of tomorrow, really kind of was a wake-up call to me, especially after seeing this chart, which is like, you know, the last 20 years have been the hottest years on record ever. And that is almost impossible to stop at this point because of how much CO2 is trapping heat in the atmosphere, and we can't take it out. So, you know, I kind of got crazy about this, and I started reading a lot. And, you know, I learned about how climate change is killing off species at 100 times the natural rate. I learned about the climate refugees who are already experiencing these kind of horrible disasters, and it's causing wars and migration and just this like unbearable loss. But the most upsetting thing to me was just listening over and over again to scientists say where we need to be, and seeing the gap between where we need to be and where our governments are promising we can go. And that gap kind of has gotten wider and wider. And even though it feels like we're making progress, it's still woefully inadequate. So there's a communications problem here. And I'm working on the project, became super depressed. So I'm still at Droga 5. I'm working on all my other client work, and I just became like a real bummer. And my husband and I would go to parties, and I would end up like in the corner telling people about like how screwed we are. And he would be like, okay, it's time to go home. So it was like kind of a dark time for me. And one day I was in a briefing for a certain chewing gum brand that shall not be named, but I'm in this briefing, and I think they were explaining like the history of the flavor crystals in the gum. And I just had like an out of body experience where I was kind of like, oh my God, what are you doing here? Like, the world is ending. Nobody knows. You're learning about the history of flavor crystals. It was like a total movie moment. I went to the bathroom, splashed water on my face. And I kind of knew in that moment that something had to change for me, just like from a mental health perspective. So, you know, I guess at this point, I think it's important to say and acknowledge like how privileged I am to have had this realization how I did. Like, most people in the world don't get to realize how bad climate change is through PowerPoints and reading books. Many people have like actually experienced it on a day-to-day basis. And even more than that, like Indigenous cultures have known about it for thousands of years, and the West is just catching up. But I do think we kind of have to have empathy for each other and grace. And the most important thing is like that we all understand it and help each other understand it. And that there's still time to avoid the worst. So I just wanted to have that segue. But back to Droga, a couple weeks after my out of body experience, I called John Marshall, the guy who was running the project that I had been working on, and I asked him if he needed help operationalizing his little creative collective of people working on this. And I kind of shocked myself by resigning at Droga and going to help him build this thing. And now I'm the chief creative officer, and it's awesome. We have over 200 agencies, media companies, data analytics firms, all who've kind of like thrown in, raised their hand to donate time and resources to helping shift the narrative on this. And we've worked with a ton of, my good friends at all of these agencies, and it's been just super fun and also really inspiring to see how many people are just like so keen to dig in to literally the hardest brief in the entire world. And we've made a lot of really good progress in the last 2 years. And our whole theory of change is about moving audiences that aren't necessarily engaged on the issue. So there's a lot of, I don't know if people are familiar with like the Sunrise Movement or other movements like that, but they're kind of focused on younger generations who are really engaged on the issue. But most people honestly don't think about it that much, don't care about it that much. I think there's this crazy stat that like only 27% of people in America are concerned about it, and only 7% talk about it on a regular basis. So for people who are engaged, it feels like it's all around us, but in reality, it's kind of not really on people's radars very often. So our job is to go after those audiences, make them realize that it is a big concern and that they should, get on board with climate action and support government action. So I thought it would be fun just to look at some of the work we've done so far in the last couple of years, just like a highlight of a couple things with some of our partners. The first thing I wanted to show you is something we did with Joan Creative. And the point of this project was to get young Republican men to engage on climate and to lift their support for government action. This was a huge education for me just on how important messengers are in your messaging, like beyond the message, who delivers it is almost more important, because that's kind of the base layer of trust people need to engage with an idea. So I don't know if everybody knows Florida Man, the concept of Florida Man, but this was an actual Florida man that we cast and recruited in Florida. You might remember him from his story. I'll just play this.
It all started as a simple routine beer run. So me and my buddy here found this big ass gator. Except the real one was bigger and realer. Anyways, we took it with us. Me and this gator was just minding our own business. Maybe we got a little wild.
Is he taking the last bit of the beer? Are you taking the last bit? Come here, bring yours.
We started playing a little gator tag. The next thing I know, I became a national headline. If you're a fan of Florida Man stories, you should know we're an endangered species. Scientists now forecast in the next decade, 1.3 million homes in Florida alone will be at risk of flood due to rising sea levels. 1.3 million homes? Think about what that's gonna do to Florida Man's natural habitat. The polar bears. Save me instead. Tell the man to save Florida Man. Visit SaveFloridaMan.com.
So that campaign, which had like tons of bells and whistles around it that I don't have here, but that raised support for government action with young Republican men by 20 points, which in politics is a really, really high number. So it gave us confidence that we can do this if we spoke to people in the right way.
It all started as a simple.
The next thing I'm going to show you is a campaign called Science Moms. So in our research, and we do a ton of research and analytics, we're like constantly testing messaging, constantly kind of like doing persuasion tests for different audiences. We found that moms are by far the most concerned group of people about climate. Makes sense, right? So they're kids who are going to inherit the planet. But they don't totally get what climate change is, which fair, it's very complicated. And because they don't totally get what it is, they don't feel confident talking about it with their friends, which means they don't really like have it as an issue that they care about in their daily lives, and they're not taking action on it. So we wanted to create a brand or an organization for them that they could trust and that they could relate to. So we created this brand called Science Moms, which is climate scientists who are also mothers. It's this like really interesting and very like weighty identity because these women know so much about what's going to happen to the planet. And they also have to have like an extraordinary amount of hope for their kids. This, we make content for them that helps moms engage with climate and like relate to it, understand it, break it down easily, and then take action. And honestly, by far, this is like the most successful campaign I've ever worked on in my career. It's like these women are like catnip for the press. Every brand wants to partner with them. And I think it's because they're just normal people who, are worried, and you're used to seeing the scientist in the white lab coat being kind of, politicized. And these are just regular women who happen to be climate scientists. So I wanted to show you the first piece of work we did for this campaign.
I remember this one moment. We go to the beach a lot. I ran to kind of the water edge, and my mom said something along the lines of like, now it's your turn. Take that first step. Just like my mom wanted my life to be better than what she had as a kid. When I became a mom myself, I feel like my whole world changed. Sometimes I feel like I'm just looking at myself in a mirror. There's some light that's there within her that makes me continue to do the climate science work that I do. You don't have to be a climate scientist to want to protect the earth. As moms, we care about our children and the environment they grow up in. And for Mia, I want you to know that I worked really hard to be a part of the change to make it a better place for you.
These women are like super incredible, and I really encourage you to go read about them, learn about them. They're just like, they've changed my life. And this kind of communication that's like no politics, no fires, like no emergency crisis now, has really connected with moms because they get, the core of this is about their kids, and that's what these women kind of represent. So this is an ongoing campaign that we're doing. And the last thing I want to show you is a campaign we did with the community in Miami, where it's called Vote Like a Madre. We did this for the 2020 election. We got Latina moms to pinky promise their kids they would vote for candidates with bold climate plans and post those promises on Instagram. And this went like totally crazy gangbusters. Like J-Lo joined, Jessica Alba, Eva Longoria, like tons of people joined this campaign, and it drove tens of thousands of incremental votes in states that mattered. So this was one where I was like, wow, advertising is powerful, and when used the right way can actually make a huge difference. And we'll be doing this again in the midterms next year. So yeah, this is a little bit about what I've been up to at Potential Energy with some of our partners. I think that, dedicating my life to actually working on the problem has made me like a lot more fun at parties again. I feel better working on it, even though we're still so far from where we need to be. And what we're doing is just this teeny tiny little puzzle piece in a really, really large system. I've just learned that like I gain hope from action and not the reverse. I can't hope for action. I have to like actually do something to feel hope. But I want to go back to the beginning of the talk when I was talking to you about all the people who've reached out to me with kind of emails after I left Droga about wanting to chat, feeling like they're, maybe starting to hear the, uh-oh, am I bad voice in the back of their heads. And it turns out a lot of people feel this way, and it's not something that they really teach you in ad school. It might also be just that a lot of people feel this way about a lot of industries once you make it like, pretty far into your career. it also could just be a midlife crisis, like who knows? But I don't think that you have to like have a mental breakdown to make a difference. And in fact, in the years that I've been doing this, I've realized how important it is to have activists and advocates on the inside. It's almost more important than having them on the outside. So I want to give you the advice, like preemptively, that I usually give creatives who reach out to me feeling kind of conflicted about their role in advertising. And the number one thing that I tell people is to know their power. Like when you leave here and you go out into the world, you will be in charge of building the communications platforms for the biggest brands in basically the world. And in America, companies kind of have more power than people, unfortunately. So this is like a very big deal. And as creative strategists, brand managers, like especially VCU graduates, because you're very sought after in the world, you're going to be in rooms with the leaders of these companies, and you're going to have their ear, and they're going to listen to you because you're good at your jobs. And we have the power to put pressure on these people to be better, and we also have the power to decide what we feel comfortable working on and what we don't feel comfortable working on. And that may seem scary, but I think it's important to remember that like your agencies need you to be successful. Like you're the talent that basically creates their competitive advantage, especially out of this school. So use that power, advocate for bigger commitments from your agencies, advocate for bigger commitments from your clients, raise your voice if you feel uncomfortable working on something, or, and always be pushing your clients to do better. There's this kind of inspiring stat. It's like half sad, half inspiring, but companies are doing like a much better job at being climate responsible than the government is at the moment. And I think 20% of our committed emissions reductions are from corporations. And these corporations aren't making these commitments because they're like super good people out of the goodness of their hearts, right? They're doing it because their employees are asking for it. They're doing it because they're trying to hire people. And when people are looking into where they want to work at companies who are doing good for the world, and because their customers are asking for more responsible products. So there is movement here to, push companies. And though, we're making progress, still only 25% of companies have made super bold commitments. So when you get into these positions and you're working with these massive corporations and setting the tone for them, you can play a huge role in influencing them to step up. So I encourage you to do that. The next thing I tell people is to be a responsible culture creator. So as storytellers, we make content that shapes culture, right? And culture moves before the economy moves, which moves before politics moves. Like moving culture is essential to making change in this world, and you hold the key to doing that. So use your stories to help normalize a better way of life, right? Like it doesn't mean that every project you do has to be some kind of like weird moralizing tale, but if you're setting a spot in a kitchen, throw an electric range in there. If your spot is set in a car, like why not make it an electric car? These are just tiny little signals you can give the public to say, hey, this is normal and this is where we're going and this is aspirational. And all you have to do is like write a line into a script and it shows up on set when you get there, which is kind of what I realized in that first spot that I showed you about Mariah Carey. It's like you write it and then suddenly a couple weeks later you show up and it's real. And that is one of the most exciting feelings in the world. So yeah, use your, ask yourself whether your ideas are going to positively or negatively impact the planet. And I want to give you an example of this last point, because I was judging the One Show a couple years ago, and there was this campaign that JetBlue did where they delivered authentic New York pizza to expats, New York expats who were in LA. So they were just flying tons of pizza across the country to give to New York expats. And this case study like gave me a full panic attack while I was watching it, because this just seemed like not a net benefit for society. And also LA like has good pizza. It's fine. So this is the kind of thing that like, accelerating climate change to like send pizzas halfway across the world. If you will have ideas like this because you're smart and fun and clever. And And in the initial stages, in the conceptual stage, they will seem like good ideas, but I think we really have to take the time to ask ourselves whether an idea is responsible as well. And my last piece of advice is I tell people to find their place in the movement, whatever your movement, whatever you care about. There's always a really specific place for people. And when I talk about this, I like to think about Dr. Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson and Catherine Wilkerson's framework from their book, All We Can Save, which if you haven't read it, I highly recommend. It's like an anthology of essays about the climate crisis written by women in all kinds of fields, from science to indigenous rights to et cetera, et cetera. But they have this framework. It's called circles. And you ask yourself, what brings you joy? So what gets you up in the morning? What makes you really happy? What are you good at? So what are your special skills? What kind of network do you have? What kind of resources do you have at your disposal? And then what is the work that needs doing in whatever movement you care about? And the intersection of these circles is what you should do. And I think this is a big challenge in climate change. It feels so big and gnarly, and you feel like this teeny tiny pinhead, and like there's nothing you can do to actually help. We always hear, well, my individual actions don't mean anything, but it's not totally true, right? Like, yes, in general, we have to like act in a collective fashion to get where we need to go. But if everybody finds their little place, that has the opportunity to spur a lot of kind of domino effects. If you're, and all of you right now are learning communications, and like communications is a super necessary aspect of any movement. I would venture to say like the most important aspect of any movement is communicating why it's important to people. So that's a huge benefit to any movement and a big contribution. So I would use this circle to find out how you want to participate. And I think now is when I pitch you on coming to work with me. So this is my email. If you want to be a part of this coalition, if you want to do something different and join kind of like a ragtag group of corporate dropouts who are dedicating their life to this, email me. We need as many talented, committed people working on this problem as humanly possible. And I would gladly love to talk to Annie and all of you. I wanted to end, I've kind of flown through this, so we probably have like a ton of time left, but I wanted to end by saying that I love advertising, and I don't want this to feel like an indictment of the industry. When done right, I think it has the power to shape culture, change narratives. It's really an essential kind of part of the cultural puzzle. And that's why I'm using it to kind of get us out of the stickiest mess in human history. It's because I believe in it so much. But, as Peter Parker's uncle said, with great power comes great responsibility. But I can't go out on a Spider-Man quote. That's just not cool. So I wanted to leave you with something that I heard the Nigerian author Wole Soyinka say in a podcast recently. He said, "I would rather be reading, writing, playing at peace, but I cannot attain peace if I have not confronted that which is pernicious." And I just hope that you always use your powers to take on what you think needs fixing. That doesn't mean that on every project you need to be like a warrior, but you have a lot of power, and I just hope that you harness it to change the world when you leave here. And that is the end of my presentation. So I think we probably have a ton of time for questions. But I'll stop sharing so we can have a chat.
We've got a good amount of time for questions. So if you've got any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat or raise your hand. Jemima, it looks like she put one in the chat. How do you advocate for policy changes through creative work while also avoiding the politics surrounding climate change, or is that even possible?
Yeah, that's a great question. So actually for us, it's really relevant because we're a 501c3, which means we actually can't advocate for specific policies. We can only do advocacy education. So we also find that the reason why most people don't engage on climate is because they think it's political, and they think the political system is either broken or toxic or whatever. So what we do is we just talk to people about, the nature of the problem, what's actually happening. We tell them there's scientific consensus on it. We tell them that later is too late to act on it. We tell them that it's about their kids. And we tell them the number one thing that gets them to support government action, which is that it's pollution. And pollution is not political, right? Nobody likes pollution. It's just bad. It stays up there, it traps heat. A lot of people are very confused about climate change because they've heard it's plastic straws, it's, I gotta stop eating meat, it's, and all those things are part of it. But at the end of the day, we're putting too much carbon pollution in the air. It's trapping heat. We need to move to cleaner sources. When you explain it to people like that, it seems so common sense that they immediately raise their support. So there are ways to do it.
Awesome. And it looks like Ashanti has a question as well. If you want to go ahead and ask that.
Hi, thank you so much for talking to us today. This speaks a lot to my experience because I actually started off on the nonprofit side in PR, and I loved it, but I had the bad luck of choosing nonprofits I felt like drove me into the ground. And I love the nonprofit space, and I see myself going back to some capacity, maybe to an NGO or another nonprofit agency or a purpose-led agency. And I guess my question is, and I mean, this could apply for any workplace, but how can you tell, or like, what's a good way of trying to find a nonprofit or a agency to work for that has a healthy work-life balance and also healthy expectations? Because one thing I've noticed with nonprofits is that everyone's so passionate that they expect you to put everything that you have into it, and that's not sustainable.
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. I think it applies to for-profit too. Like, the ad industry is not like super well known for like its amazing work hours, but I do think that there is this thing called compassion fatigue that a lot of people who work in NGOs get. And it's just like, you are literally feel like you're taking on the weight of the world every day. And it just, like you said, it grinds you down. And I think a couple things have to happen. One, I think that nonprofits, unfortunately, it's kind of like, nursing or being a teacher in this country. It's like, you don't get paid as much for doing really valuable work. And if you're working in a for-profit, getting paid a ton, but your work might not be as valuable, just like if you're a banker. And like, those are important jobs, but just like net benefit to society, they're very lopsided. So I think people are starting to come around to this, like funders in the nonprofit space, but I think we have to pay people more in nonprofits for the work that they do so that they can hire more people and not everybody isn't like totally burnt out all the time. But two, I think, you need to ask when you're interviewing, what are your policies around mental health? What is the vacation time? Like, do you offer therapy? Like, these are all things that at Potential Energy, I'm a huge advocate for, because we're literally talking about the end of the world all day. And sometimes you forget that because you're like, I'm just doing the work. But then you realize that it's this kind of insidious thing in the back of your head that's always there. And yeah, I think you just have to be really explicit and also be a champion for those kinds of policies wherever you go, whether that's nonprofit or not.
Thank you.
I'm going to go ahead and ask a question. So with climate change, there's this pit of anxiety that comes once it's mentioned for me a lot of the time. And I start to get very like, I don't want to think about this. This is too much. I feel like I can't do much. I'm just going to put my head down and focus on what I can do. And what I can do is school right now. And how can I, like, as a student that's going into the world, maybe not necessarily going to Potential Energy, but like maybe agency side, maybe something like that. How can I both kind of get past that pit of anxiety that comes with the climate change and relate my work to more environmentalism and more advocacy?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it's so sad, right? Like, your generation is experiencing climate anxiety on a level that older generations aren't, and yet you've had the least amount to do with causing the problem, which is just so unfair and tragic, I think. But I also think that there's an awakening happening on this issue, which is amazing. And there are people, like, it's not really niche anymore to, want to find people to take action with. And there's just a ton of like organizations on the ground in local communities that are doing good work every day. And I think sometimes because of the nature of politics now and like the entertainment factor of the political world, everything is nationalized, right? Everything becomes this like kind of like horse race battle question on the national stage. But a lot of the best work on climate is happening in regional places, local places. States have a ton of power to change, put in clean energy standards, change the way they're living. So I would encourage you to find a local organization that is doing good work, pitch in where you can, find your place in the little circles diagram, and go to that organization and say, hey, I have whatever, 5 free hours a week. Like, what can I help you guys with? And yeah, not only is that act like helpful in the movement, but it's also builds community. And I think that's the number one thing that's lacking right now in the climate movement is like, we need to have joy in our activism. We need to like be with people that we love and we have fun with, and we have to laugh and we have to cry together. And like, that doesn't happen when you're kind of just reading the news, freaking out about what's going on in the world. So yeah, I would encourage you to just like find a local org and get involved however you can, and try not to think about like the full weight of the problem all the time, and do your little part in your corner.
Awesome, thank you. And would you mind sharing that Venn diagram that you showed?
Yeah, for sure.
Didn't get a screenshot of it quick enough. And
I
loved
will.
it.
I'll share this whole presentation with Ashley and Emma, and then they can share it around.
Okay, lovely. And it looks like Alicia has a question, if you want to go ahead and ask that.
Yes. So currently I'm actually working on a project to get a big company to help people grasp the full scope of natural disasters. And what I'm noticing is that there's this tiny window of opportunity between where the world turns from like sympathy and donations, and then it immediately turns to something else big happening in the news. So I just wanted to know some ways that you guys maybe have tried to combat that, or try to capture people's attention in that short time frame. Because as soon as something happens, it's like the next week something else is in the news. Kim Kardashian's having a baby or something else. So it seems like with a lot of things like climate change or trying to make these big movements, you have a short amount of time to really grasp people's attention. So I just kind of wanted to get your opinion on that.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, it's a great question for any campaign you work on, honestly, even if you're at an agency and you're doing like regular client work. It's really hard to break through. There's so much going on. There's like so few stories that like actually capture the national conversation now. But I think for us, a lot of it is about like hacking culture and making sure that we're infusing kind of the climate change message into places people already are, things they already like, that we're talking about it in new and fresh ways with people that they already listen to and trust. So, whether that's, I think the Florida Man example is a good example, because that's something that people are like already Googling all the time, and they don't expect like a funny message from that messenger. So that's the kind of thing that kind of leapfrogs the traditional kind of issue advocacy space and permeates culture. I also think, it's about creating like a slow drip. So I feel like there's a lot of the times where it's like, oh, we're talking about this issue now because it's Earth Day or because it's whatever day, and then it's gone. But if you can like create content for an audience that is always engaged and that content is super entertaining, then you can have like, elaboration over a really long period of time with a segment of the population who's like very invested. So I think it's about, changing the model from like the 15-second or 30-second ad that makes you want to do something, to like cultivating a community that cares and like making content for those people that's entertaining and that they want to share.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, that's awesome.
Awesome. And it looks like Dylan has a question as well, if you want to go ahead and ask that.
Thank you so much for your time today, Casey. One of the questions that I had was just like your experience around not just building a creative campaign, a message, but on a consultancy level of business transformation for like Shell or Exxon. And it's like, yes, we know holding companies create these greenwashing campaigns, but what does a consultant from whether Accenture or a nonprofit or somewhere else, like what's that role in trying to change a huge oil and gas company for the good of the environment? What are your thoughts on that conversation?
That's a really good question. I don't know that I have a very good answer. I think that I know the role of consulting with brands who are just kind of like making stuff and want to make that stuff in a better way. To be really honest, I don't think there's much hope for the oil and gas industry in terms of like lobbying them to do better. They've known about this for over 60 years and have sowed doubt and hidden the actual facts about what their products do to the environment. So they're very aware. And advertisers actually help them create content that misleads the public and tells the public that they're doing better than they actually are. I think, we monitor a lot of the spending on fossil fuel advertising, and they're spending like $200 million a year to tell the public that they're changing, when really 0.01% of their actual operations are on renewable and different sources of fuel. So I think the best thing that we can do as communicators is to refuse to work on those clients, to be quite honest. And I don't think, that we can like totally shut down the fossil fuel industry. Obviously, we're all implicated. Like I'm heating my house right now with gas. Like I don't have a choice, but I think that we can play a part in making the public understand the insidiousness of that business and how like we need to be offered choices that are better for the world. It might not be a satisfying answer, but that's kind of how I feel.
I have another question to kind of tack on to that. How can we as like younger creatives or juniors going into the industry kind of really feel empowered to say, no, this brief is not great, this brand is not great, I don't feel comfortable working on them, without losing our jobs or being worried that our career is going to be affected by it in any way, shape, or form?
That's a really good question. And it is a privilege to be able to do that and say that. I think power in numbers is huge. If you talk to a couple people in the creative department, everybody kind of feels icky about working on it. Going to your bosses as like a group helps. I know that there's some agencies that kind of have like policies about this where they do work for oil and gas firms and you can opt out, which I think says something about how they know that that's probably, they probably shouldn't be doing that work. But yeah, I think solidarity in numbers, and then also obviously, not being too militant about it, but maybe talking one-on-one with your creative directors about your concerns, not saying like, I refuse to work on this and walking out, but just saying, look, here's why I feel a little bit uncomfortable about this. Maybe we can come up with a plan about how we can talk to the client about what their plans are to do better, or et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's kind of varying degrees of putting your toes in those waters.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's awesome. Thank you. If there are any more questions, go ahead and raise your hand. We've got, looks like 7 more minutes. But if not, we can go ahead and start the breakout room early if people want. It looks like Emma Gatlin has a question. You can go ahead and ask that whenever. Just unmute yourself.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation and your time. This has been really, really cool. But I wanted to ask kind of that Venn diagram that you showed. I really liked that. But then also if we kind of have something that we feel like we are working towards that we believe needs changing, such as like social justice or accessibility, but then we also have that weight that like the planet is literally being destroyed. kind of how do we like reconcile that, or like how do we still make changes even though we also are fighting for something else, if that makes sense. I don't know if I articulated that well.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, here's the good news and the horrible news. Climate change affects every single aspect of life, and all of the issues that you care about are going to be made worse by climate change. So, you know, whether that's accessibility, social justice, like the gap is going to widen so much on inequality if we just kind of let climate change run rampant, right? The people who are going to lose their homes, the people who are going to be forced to migrate, those are going to be people who are lower income. And the people who have more wealth and who are hoarding wealth are going to be okay. So I think it's about finding the intersection of the issues you care about and understanding kind of like the implications that one has on the other. And, you know, it's kind of like if you go to a climate march and you look around, you see the signs, and the signs are like, there's like 50,000 different people there with their own issue, but it all fits in a climate march because it's literally the air we breathe and the planet we live on where everything, all these things are happening. So I think there are ways to link those things together. And I think it's actually a really cool assignment to try to help people understand how social movements are linked and, you know, how everything is interconnected.
The head of the XD track actually asked, are there any resources for identifying companies, organizations, or agencies that are already actively contributing in the category?
Yeah.
I know Dylan put Clean Creatives, but like any others?
Yeah, so Clean Creatives is great. I mean, everyone on those lists has refused to work for oil and gas companies, so that's very exciting. So they've had their heads in the right places. I think you can Google any company who signed Amazon's climate pledge, probably has a pretty decent plan and commitments on climate. All this stuff, you know, is self-reported, and like there's no actual kind of measurement for companies doing what they say they're going to do. But I think there are a ton of good companies and companies you might not really like think about as being, you know, total social advocates. Like Walmart and McDonald's have really good climate plans and, you know, are like buying up solar fields left and right. And so you just got to do a little digging, I think, when you start researching companies and clients and agencies, and ask those questions, like ask what their climate commitments are. And if they don't have any, ask if they'd be willing to work with you on building some.
Awesome. And I have another question. Sorry, everyone. I have a question about greenwashing and working for brands that claim to be very environmental and very environmental heavy, but once you like get in and start researching a little bit, it's very clear that they're not. How can we kind of like, if we end up working for something like that, how can we kind of push them like towards actually being green and not just being greenwashed, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. I feel that way sometimes, just even in my job. Like we did a spot with the America's All In Coalition, which is a bunch of companies that after Trump pulled out of Paris were like, no, we're still in, we're gonna work towards the goals of Paris. But I'm like, are they? Like, I'm not totally sure. So I think it's important to like kind of get to the bottom of how companies are achieving their commitments. It's one thing to like make a commitment, it's another thing to like ask, okay, well, what exactly are you doing that's gonna get us there? Takes a little bit of digging, and greenwashing is rampant. But I think if you're willing to do the work and like kind of get to the bottom of it and ask the right questions, you can kind of tell like who's sincere from who's not, you know? I saw two questions in the chat that were not climate related that I wanted to answer. One was, what NHL team do you rep? I'm a hardcore Canadiens fan. I'm from Montreal. It's literally the only sport we have. Don't come at me. And the second is my favorite Brandcenter memory. That's a really hard one. I don't know if this is my favorite memory because it's actually kind of traumatic, but it's a funny story. In the old building at the Adcenter, the one down by Shaka Bottom, there were like these magazine racks on the sides of the walls outside every class. And Tim Gordon, who's now the CCO of Droga, who was my best friend, bet me that I couldn't like high kick one of the magazine racks. And I was like, of course I can high kick a magazine rack. What are you talking about? And I went for it, and fully, like, my leg left my body with my other leg, and I just fell flat on my back and smashed my head on the ground. And I spent 2 days in the hospital in Richmond because of this stupid bet that Tim bet me. But I won the bet because I did kick the rack, and he owed me dinner at Avalon, I think, or something. But it's just like a memory that really sticks out because I still have like the scars from it.
Oh, that's funny.
I miss those days.
So it looks like Dunny has one more question. And after that, we're gonna go ahead and close this out.
Hi, Casey. Really good presentation. But yeah, so I heard in it, you kind of mentioned like being a socialist, and that was pretty interesting to me because I don't like to kind of pigeonhole myself into one specific ideology. I'm generally in just pretty far left. And advertising is kind of interesting because sometimes I think to myself, like, wow, like if we had this like world without capitalism, would this job like even exist? And so many brands are at their core just kind of the same thing. And under a less wasteful society, we probably wouldn't have like 100 different brands of pasta. And it can kind of make me sometimes disillusioned with the entire industry. And I was wondering if you've ever dealt with that same disillusionment and like how you handle it.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I'm a democratic socialist. I probably should have said that earlier, but I think that's like the reason why the "uh-oh, am I bad" voice was so prominent for me throughout my career, because advertising is so fun. It's like you just get to sit in a room with your best friends thinking of ridiculous nonsense and like telling amazing stories and making stuff. It's like the coolest job in the world, and you get paid a lot to do it. On the other hand, yeah, like, do people need to be constantly reminded that they can buy more stuff? Like, in my ideal world, no. And I think that's part of the reason why I made this choice, but that's an entirely personal decision, and everybody has their own ideology and political stance. And, you could very well think that capitalism is the best way to get us out of the climate crisis. And like, according to some of those stats that I showed, like, corporations are moving faster than the government. So there is something to that. But I think it's one of those things that you kind of just have to keep exploring and dealing with. And if it's like the voice gets louder and louder, then you have to kind of act on it and make a move. And the good news is that the skills you're learning here are applicable to all kinds of things, right? You're just learning how to be a storyteller and how to make stuff. And we live in a world that is like 99% content now. So those skills can transfer to a lot of different areas. I don't think they're exclusive to what you're learning here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for this presentation, Casey. It was fantastic. And thank you everyone for coming. This closes out this Friday's forum.
Thank you all so much. It was really, really fun to be with you today. Highlight of my day.
Yes, thank you so much, Casey, and have a great